Hi guys, hello, me again. We are already on week number 5 and I'm sure you guys couldn't wait any longer to hear all about number. Cause who doesn't dream of learning all about numbers?
We want the numbers, Mason. That's all we've ever wanted.
Well, after all we have learned about a string and boolean, I thought there is no other way but to talk about number now. And so I have prepared a mini presentation about number. But before we go on and talk about number, I'll have to introduce a mini thing, and that is a operator of a type of. So as you guys know, in JS we don't have variables, don't have a type. Variables are declared, and once they are assigned a value, that value can be of a certain type. But before that, we don't actually know what type it is. So there is a special keyword type of, and that is to help us navigate and to define what type it is. So for instance, if you could open your console, because it's always best to write down everything. Oh, I'm gonna check type of, and then you put 20, right? Good number. If you check type of false, it's gonna return boolean, all in quotation marks, and that's how it's happening. Type of a string, and so on and so on. So you guys from now on can always check type using type of. Today, our target topic, number. So first things first, there's no division of numeric types into integers and floating point, unlike in many other languages. So for instance, if you have a look in the table, this is C#, also a very popular language, and go integer data types, go among others, byte, we have short, we have int, we have long, and for non-integer data types, go float, we have a double, we have decimal, like plenty. In JS, we are free of that.
I'm free.
Very recently, we actually only had one numeric type in JS, and that was a number. And since very recently, we also have now big int. Big int, that stands for a big integer. And so yes, number is for numbers of any kind, integer or a floating point number, but number is limited by this scope, either on the plus or on the minus side. It's 2 to the power of 53 minus 1. And even though it seems huge, there are possible operations beyond that scope. And once somebody needed very accurate or precise numbers for beyond that scope, unfortunately in JS it was impossible. The data wasn't reliable. And so very recently, big int has been introduced to solve all those problems. So now if you need to perform an operation on humongous numbers larger than 2 to the power of 53 minus 1, you can now use big int. And that's what it is. So just to show you've got that number, and if you do max save integer, that would be the return value. As max save integer, that is the maximum number, the largest number in JS that the number could reliably represent.
It's over 9,000!
Until recently, you wouldn't be able to like perform all those operations, but now once we have big int, you can. Okay, type number notation. So, as you probably know, a dot means a number is a fraction. So I've got 2.53, and also don't put a comma because it has to be a dot. You could say 0.82, or you could skip the 0 at the beginning and just have 0.82, and it's also the same. It's the same thing. E notation, also called scientific notation, and by no means am I saying that you guys need to learn this by heart or memorize it, and then like don't be scared like, oh no, programming is not for me. I'm just saying about those so that once that it's possible that you will see something like that kind of number, and so just don't be shocked or surprised. It's okay. So for instance, this E, 2E2, it means it is equals 200. It's the same as if you would say to the program, take 2 and multiply it by 10 to the power of 2. So this is the number we are working on. Then we put E, and it is multiplication by 10. And here we could put a different number. That would mean what's the power. So you could put anything else, and it's also going to return a different value. Or another numeric system is a hexadecimal notation. So for instance, in hexadecimal notation, 29 would be represented by 1D. Also, not that you need to memorize it. Let's go to the console, and for instance, if I put 3E3, it's gonna be like as if I wanted to make an operation on 3, and I said 10 times 10, 100 times 10, 1000, 3 times 1000, 3000. That's it. And if you put 0x in your console, program JS engine will understand or notice that you are trying to introduce a number of a hexadecimal system. And so for instance, if you put EE, you will receive 238, or if you do 0x and then put FF. I'm sure if you guys had anything to do with HTML and CSS, sometimes colors are represented by the hexadecimal number system, and so I think 255 stands for white, and so on and so on. But obviously the most popular one is the decimal system. So if you put 66, it's actually 66, and that's my favorite one. There are many other kind of systems or notations, ways that you could write down your numbers. But if you are so deeply interested in other systems, then I'll definitely encourage you to go and Google it. Go binary, etc. What is the largest number in JS? To find out what is the largest number in JS, you could simply go to your console, press number, max value, already in suggestions from console, and that is the largest number. And so if you could have a look here, I've got 1 point, many other numbers, E plus 308, and this means that after all this times 10, you could add 308 zeros, and that's when you would get the maximum possible value in JS. Analogically, you could do number and go with min value, and that would be that number. And so anything beyond this scope would return infinity, and about infinity we'll say a few words at the end. And if you try to enter a number smaller than this, it's gonna return 0, because JS just can't handle anything less. It's like 0.0000000 and so on, and it's just impossible. After this scope, it cannot go any further.
I'm not going anywhere!
Operators, obviously, you could use operators in JS, and we have the same operators as in mathematics, and you should it's easier because we all studied some basics of mathematics, and it's the same order. And also the useful parentheses also should be exactly the same as at school when we did some arithmetical operations. So we know that multiplication goes first, or dividing, plus, minus, parentheses. I'll show you an example. So if we have 8 plus 8, have 16. If I do 2 plus 4 times 2, so 4 times 2 is dealt with first, so it's 8 plus 2, and it's gonna give us 10. If, however, I do 2 in parentheses, I will do the same, but I will wrap 2 and 4 in parentheses. It's going to indicate to the program that this is the priority for me. I want to first take 2 plus 4, 6. 6 times 2, it's going to give us 12. Again, simple but worth mentioning. If I do a variable x and I'll give it a value of 3, I go simple, but then guys, you shouldn't do it, because as I said, variables should have meaning. For the practice purposes, we skip that part. So we've got a variable x with 3, and I've got another variable y, and I'll give it a value of 5. Now I can do x plus y. Sorry. And also possible to just add variables, and they will take the values that are hidden or represented by those variables, and we receive the value. I could also like assign that value to a new variable, so create a variable, then r, and give it a value of x plus y. And r should give us now an 8. Cool. Worth knowing. So it's very common, and it's gonna be something used quite a lot later on, and for now it's also for you guys to like get familiar. If I create a variable called number and I give it a value of 5, and I wanted to add 1 to my number, I could write down number equals number plus 1, and it's all correct. But we could do it better, we could do it shorter. And writing down number plus plus, it's called incrementation, and we increment that number by 1 each time. Let's say if we do it in a loop, and it means exactly the same thing as the thing above, but it's much shorter. So in programming, it's all about efficiency. And so if it's shorter, it's also better. If we want to do decrementation, we would do number minus minus. And we can do other things as well. So for instance, if we do number and we want to reassign a new value to it, when we want to have a number that was 5 and now add 10 to it, we could write it down as in this notation. But you could also do a number plus equals 10, and it's going to be the same thing, the same thing. But instead of a plus operator, we could do multiply or divide or anything you need. For instance, I have a variable a, I'll give it a value of 5. Cool. And now if I wanted to give it a new value and I wanted to multiply 5 by 10, I would do a multiply equals 10, and that's the result. That's a new value of my variable a. Probably good to know some methods when we talk about numbers. And one of the quite commonly used or quite popular or good to know and maybe good for the beginning because there are so many others, it's to fixed. So as I mentioned at the very beginning, like in the class 1 and 2 and I think 3 as well, it's only possible to call methods on the objects, so the non-primitive data types, but because the JS magic happens, we can also call methods on the primitive data types. And so for that brief moment, JS would wrap
2 + 2 is 4 - 1, that's 3, quick maths.
Would wrap our primitive data type number into a object number. And the only difference is that it's spelled with the capital letter N. And when it's happening, we can call methods on it, or we can access its properties, and it exists for that moment of calling a method. And so let's go back to the console. With the help of a keyword new, you can create a new number object, and that is going to show us all possible methods that are already built in that object number. So if you expand by clicking an arrow, so on, you see that some functions, some methods already built in, and one of them is to fixed. So if I create a variable b and I'll give it a value of 10, now I have my variable 10, and if I want to call a method on it, I'll do to fixed, and it is methods in JS. Those built in are already by default in camel case notation, and here in parentheses it would expect an argument. To fixed is a method used to fix a number, and it's used for precision. So if I put 2, it would give me 2 decimal places. So for instance, my variable 10 is just 10, and it doesn't show anything what's beyond the 0, the dot. So if I do 1, it's only going to show me 1 one decimal place. If I give it an argument of 2, it will give me 2 decimal places. If I give it 3 decimal places, and so on and so on. If I give it 6, it's gonna give me 6 decimal places. But it doesn't actually change the variable. It doesn't change the value of the variable. It's only gonna happen in that moment and not reassign a new value. So if I created a variable C and I gave it a value of 43.999 and then did that to fixed, and inside parentheses I would give 2 decimal places, it would round up and give me 2 decimal places. That's how it's used. One fun fact is that, for instance, if I put 44 and then press dot, you can't actually now go on and just put the name of the method, because JS would expect you to put like whatever you meant by the number. So it expects you to introduce like a fraction. So if you can try, and it should return an error. Let's check. Yeah, well, we've got an uncode syntax error, invalid or unexpected token, because JS was expecting for you to enter what was the number you exactly meant.
What do you want?
It's not that simple.
What do you want?
And so instead you could do a dot and another dot, and that should fix the problem. Or you could wrap it in parentheses and it should also fix the problem. Again, we're flowing. Another funny thing in JS is a so-called not a number. So not a number, in short, none. It could be understood or explained as an incorrect number. So if JS is processing your lines of code, like from the top to the bottom, and it would encounter something that it would expect to be a number, but it doesn't understand notation, or it isn't a number, it's gonna return the value of not a number. It's funny because it says it's not a number, but as a type, it is a number. Let's go to the console. Console is always best to explain everything. So make sure that we are on the same page. Type of, from the beginning of the class we have type of not a number returns a number. So even though it's not recognized as a number, it is gonna return the type of a number. And then anything, if you try to operate on the not a number, like for instance 5 times not a number, not a percentage mark, 5 times not a number will give us not a number. If I do 5 plus not a number, it should also give us not a number, because anything you try doing on not a number should return not a number. And then if you wonder what should happen if you do 5 as a number plus a in strings. So JS is like, it's a friendly language.
Your friendly neighborhood.
JavaScript.
Kind of like it doesn't want any trouble in the code, and it will always assume that if there is a problem, it's probably because you kind of missed something, but it's not because, you know, it's always going to assume that it's something that you intended, that maybe you have forgotten about, like a string or something. So for instance, here, if you try doing 5 plus a, instead of returning an error or not a number, it will do the conversion. So it will assume that you forgot to put the quotation marks around 5 and will concatenate 5 and a and just give you 5a. So sometimes you have to be careful because of like this JS being so very helpful, that you will end up with something that you not necessarily wanted to achieve. And instead of receiving an error, you will get an 5a as a string when it was a mistake on your side. If you do, what should happen if you do 5 times a? Well, here JS, even JS isn't able to help you. It's just like you can't do 5 times a string. No concatenation, no conversion. It would try since it's multiplication. So it would say, okay, this is like a very strong mathematical operator. So let's change a string into a number. So it would remove the strings from a and would say, okay, I'll try do 5 times a, but a is not a number, and eventually that's the message you'll receive, not a number. And well, if you do ss plus none, again, JS being very helpful to say, alright, maybe you forgot you put in your quotation marks, and we'll just concatenate those two. So you have to be really careful. And this is our last slide. Last but not least, but yep, we are on infinity. Infinity is a value of a type number. Infinity is you will reach infinity after exceeding a certain value. So once if you put the number dot max value, you will receive a max value. If you're gonna exceed that maximum value in JS, you will enter infinity. And unfortunately, we can get there, but we can never return from infinity.
If I take one more step, it'll be the farthest away from home I've ever been.
So if you do some like crazy operations on a number, and that number will be assigned a value of infinity, it can never be changed back to what it was, even if you do minus something, because once you're in infinity, it's kind of like, we don't know where it is, what it is. It's just like a black hole before this value communicates an error. So same as not a number, it's a message in a communication so that you know something went wrong, and well, there is no way back.
After this, there is no turning back.
Infinity minus infinity will give you a not a number. You can't do infinity minus infinity. And that would be all for today, I think. Thank you.